The day has finally arrived where I can tell you exactly how the new TLX Type S drives out on the road and out on the track, because I was able to drive this on the track at Laguna Seca. If you haven't seen part 1 of this video, where I take a look at the exterior design, the interior design, and talk about the features and functions of the vehicle, be sure and check that out after you watch this video. So without further ado, let's just dive out on the road. Let's be realistic, not too many people are going to bring their Type S to a track, but if you choose to do so, the TLX is a surprising amount of fun. This is obviously heavier than some of the European competition, and it has a bit more weight on the front axle, but the TLX has a torque vectoring rear end, and this can send more power to the rear axle because it overdrives the rear axle compared to something like a Volvo S60. And although you can find luxury sports sedans with a torque vectoring rear axle, you generally won't find them in a vehicle for the price tag that the TLX Type S wears. That's really obvious out on the track here because you can apply power earlier than you'd expect in a vehicle that has a weight balance like we find in the TLX. Again, something along the lines of that Volvo S60. But you'll certainly also notice the difference versus something like an Audi S4, because the S4 carries a reasonable amount of weight over its front axle as well, just due to the design of the Audi Quattro system. Even though the Audi Quattro system is capable of sending more power to the rear axle more consistently than the TLX Type S in general terms, it doesn't have the torque vectoring ability, and that is going to make it feel different in the corners. Now, unfortunately, out here on the track, I haven't really been able to vlog this because, as you can see in the video, we're doing a lead-follow thing here at Laguna Seca, but I suspect that overall long-term braking performance is going to be a little bit behind some of the competition, primarily because of the curb weight. At around 4,200 pounds for the model that I'm driving right now, this is a little bit heavier than some of the European competition. It's not quite as heavy as the fastest version of the Volvo S60. That's considerably heavier than this thanks to its hybrid battery pack, but this is going to be about 400 pounds heavier than some of the lightest rear-wheel drive options. But again, this is going to be a lot less expensive than those options. The track is a great place to talk about this 10-speed automatic transmission. The shifts definitely have a crisp feel to them, and they're certainly faster than you'll find out of something like a Lexus ES, or honestly, the Lexus IS as well. Now, we don't know exactly what the future holds for the new upcoming Lexus IS 500. That could be a really interesting option in this segment, but I suspect it's probably going to follow the same sort of transmission tuning that we see in the rest of the Lexus IS lineup, which is to say, a little bit slow compared to what we find in the TLX Type S. Let's start out this drive section on an unusual road surface. This is a gravel road around the Laguna Seca track. This is an excellent surface to demonstrate the TLX Type S on, not because this feels sort of like an all-wheel drive rally car, even though it can feel like that at some times, especially with the torque vectoring rear axle, but because the TLX Type S is designed to be daily driver livable. So with this suspension in the comfort mode, even with 35 series tires on it, this soaks up all of the bumps out here on this road surface really, really well. Now, if I want to take it to the next level, I could put it in normal. Things get a little bit firmer. And if I put this in Sport Plus, this is going to give us the most aggressive suspension tune. And here, you will definitely feel some of those minor road imperfections come through into the cabin. But honestly, even in Sport Plus, this is still a relatively comfortable ride. The Type S is not designed to compete with the likes of the BMW M3 or M4 or the C63. Instead, this is designed to compete in the mid-level performance category, where we see, honestly, the most competition. Things like the C63, the Q50 Red Sport, or the base Q50 with the twin-turbo V6, or something like a Volvo S60 T8 plug-in hybrid. With that in mind, let's dive into the performance figures. 0 to 60 happened in this model in 4.95 seconds. That does make this a little bit slower than most of the European competition. But when we talk about similarly priced competition, this is going to be significantly faster. Because depending on exactly how you have your BMW 330i configured, or C300 configured, or even something like a Volvo S60 T6, it may end up being more expensive than this particular model. Even though the TLX Type S is the most performance-oriented sedan that Acura has ever produced, it's still an Acura, and that means that a lot of value is baked into the equation. Even though this 3-liter engine has just one turbo rather than two, turbo lag is really kept to a minimum, surprisingly so. You won't really notice the difference in terms of turbo lag between this and any of the European competition. Part of that is because this has a really, really advantageous torque curve. Peak torque happens at just 1,400 RPM. But the other part of this equation is that first gear in this 10-speed automatic transmission is extremely extremely low. And that really helps this vehicle feel a bit faster than the 4.95 second 0 to 60 number would otherwise look, because first gear launch is very, very aggressive. Now, after first gear launches, then the reality that this has 355 horsepower, not 380 or 400 horsepower, and the curb weight of this model is 4,200 pounds, all of that becomes a little bit more real. And I think that's why the 0 to 60 time is just a hair behind the competition. 60 to 0 stopping distances, however, are very, very similar. This model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 112 feet. That is definitely a short stopping distance. The Type S has an excellent exhaust note thanks to the active valved exhaust system. Of course, if you wanted it quieter, as I said before, you could put it in comfort mode. But interestingly enough, the transmission mode is separate. So Drive and Sport is the DS button right there in the center console, and the rest of the drive modes are controlled via this dynamic mode knob right here in the center console. The most dynamic experience is going to be with the transmission in Sport and the dynamic mode in Sport Plus. In that mode, when you come into the corner, it's going to automatically downshift for you to keep you at higher revs so that way you can get the maximum amount of power leaving the corner. It's also going to tweak the super handling all-wheel drive system to send a little bit more power to the rear and be a little bit more aggressive at the torque vectoring. As has been the case with Acura for a while, super handling all-wheel drive is really one of the defining features for the TLX Type S. What's unique about this system is its ability to send more power to the rear axle, even in a straight line, than you'll find in conventional all-wheel drive systems with a similar engine layout, say the Volvo S60 T6, and then the ability to send that power across the rear axle to create a yaw motion in the vehicle, basically help turn the vehicle around the corner. You'll really notice that if you start driving this harder out in your favorite winding mountain road. Another vehicle with a similar amount of weight in the front might feel a little bit ponderous in the corner, may feel like the front end is unwilling to turn in, but the TLX Type S, if you add a little bit of throttle, it has the ability to help push the rear end around. Now, the laws of physics have to be obeyed, and if we're just going downhill or in neutral handling, we still have a reasonable amount of weight up front, and this is still heavier than some of the competition. But the torque vectoring system simply makes this more fun, and it's very accessible fun. Because in a lively rear-wheel drive vehicle, if you get a little too aggressive in the throttle in the corners, bad things can start to happen. But in this TLX Type S, bad things don't happen, because this can't send as much power to the rear wheels, but it can be really tricky with how it's sending power to the rear. It can send it, again, to just one wheel, and that has the effect of making the vehicle rotate, feel a little bit more lively, while not actually causing you to spin out. So even though this is a ton of fun out on your favorite winding mountain road, it's going to be an awful lot harder to get your asset to swing out and do things that it's not supposed to than a rear-wheel drive luxury car. And that means that even though the limits aren't going to be as high in the TLX Type S as in some of the competition, I think the limits of this vehicle are more accessible and easier to understand. Rather unfortunately, I haven't been able to spend too much time in the Type S today, so I don't have any fuel economy estimates for you. Obviously, this is going to be less efficient than the 2-liter turbo because we get a whole lot more power out of this engine. Clearly, if you want this kind of acceleration, this kind of power and high fuel economy, you'll find that in the Volvo S60 T8 plug-in hybrid, but it's not going to drive like this at all. The vast majority of the power in that Volvo happens on the front axle, so you get torque steer. That's not something that we find in the TLX Type S. It's not going to sound nearly as much fun as this either because the 4-cylinder engine just doesn't sound like this single turbo 6. I also can't say how quiet the cabin is just yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if cabin noise numbers ended up basically the same as the regular TLX. I was really surprised that out on the track, out on the open road, out on the highway, etc., this is still a very quiet vehicle, even though we have those wide 255 with summer tires. Oftentimes, upgrading to summer tires really destroys the cabin noise figures because you get a lot more road noise transmitted into the vehicle, but Acura's done a really good job of keeping things quiet in here. At least for the moment, bottom lining the TLX is pretty easy. This is not as fast as some of the competition. Actually, if I'm being honest, this is not as fast as most of the competition, but it is less expensive. And I think it's more fun than most of the competition. Because even though this doesn't have the same limits as some of those competitors from Europe, the limits of this vehicle are easy to understand. They're easy to explore, and it's just fun. It's certainly true that you'll pull more Gs in some of the European competition, but with that comes slightly higher risks. And I'm not just talking about the higher cost of the vehicle. I'm talking about the fact that exploring those limits aren't going to be quite as easy. It's going to take a little bit more dedication and a little bit more patience and perhaps a little bit more of an adventurous spirit. Rather unfortunately, Acura did not have complete pricing information on the new TLX Type S at the time that I was able to drive it, but they have released it since then, so let's just roll on into that.
Starting at $52,300, the TLX Type S is a little less expensive than I had expected. Even more surprising is the price of the summer tire option, which includes the wheels that you saw on the TLX in this video. That's just a $900 option. Personally, I would absolutely get that particular option because I think the base wheels in the TLX aren't exactly my cup of tea. They look a little bit too similar to the wheels that we find in the MDX. But the optional lightweight wheels and lightweight summer tires, those look really, really good on the Type S. That price tag is thousands of dollars less than almost all of the competition when you've comparably equipped them. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the TLX Type S doesn't get a few things that you find in the regular TLX. No fog lights, the main reason for that is likely cooling, no heated steering wheel, no heads-up display, no 360-degree camera, and no heated rear seats. It's always possible that Acura could stuff some of those options later onto the Type S as part of an option package perhaps, but at this point in time, you won't find those features on the Type S. I'm not specifically going to talk comparisons here, but let's see how the price tag lines up in this landscape. An Audi S4 starts at $49,900, but comparably equipped, it's going to be up around $63,000. The Volvo S60 Recharge R design, that's quite a mouthful, that is going to be less expensive for most people. $47,650, $56,445 comparably equipped, but it's going to get a little over $5,000 of federal tax credits and some additional local incentives because it is a plug-in hybrid. It's going to get you 10 miles per gallon better fuel economy, and it's going to go 0 to 60 notably faster than the Type S, around 4.2 seconds. However, it's just not the same thing. The Mercedes-Benz C43 AMG, $56,500 starting, comparably equipped at least $10,000 more than that base model, so significantly more expensive than the Type S. Same thing goes for the BMW M340i. It starts at $54,700. You're going to add at least $10,000 of options to get to the standard equipment that you find in the Acura. An interesting sideways comparison, I guess, could be the Alfa Romeo Giulia 2.0T, kind of, sort of. It goes 0 to 60 just a little bit slower. It's particularly quick for a base model, 5.2 seconds, 0 to 60, but $55,685 comparably equipped, so definitely a little bit more expensive. The Lexus IS 350 F Sport even manages to be more expensive when you've comparably equipped it, even though it's going to be slower 0 to 60. The comparable Lexus model theoretically later is going to be the upcoming IS 500, but we don't know how much that IS 500 is going to be priced at. Really, I think the most direct competitor to the TLX Type S, and the one that is a little bit less expensive comparably equipped, is the new Genesis G70. For 2022, it's got a little bit of a refresh, redesigned interior. It's going to get the 3.3-liter twin-turbo six-cylinder for $44,200, and the Sport Advanced all-wheel drive trim, which is more or less comparably equipped to what I was driving today, is going to be $50,045.
With the new TLX Type S, Acura has definitely created a very impressive vehicle. This is by far the most dynamic sedan that Acura has ever created. If you want something that is more fun to drive than this, you're going to have to get an NSX if you still want an Acura logo on the front. And this is really a solid competitor to something like the Audi S4. Now, clearly, some of the German options and even the Swedish options are going to be faster than this 0 to 60. In fact, in my informal 0 to 60 test out here in Monterey, I haven't been able to test this on my regular test surface. The 0 to 60 time of 4.9 seconds in this model makes it the slowest in the category, but this is significantly less expensive than the competition, especially when you consider the amount of feature content you find standard on the TLX Type S. Yes, the base price of the Audi S4 will be lower than the base price of the TLX, but the base price of the TLX Type S is almost the fully loaded price as well, because just about everything that you might be interested in is standard. I do wish it had a heads-up display, however. I think that's an odd misstep for what is essentially the flagship sedan in the Acura lineup. This is the biggest and most expensive sedan that Acura sells in the United States. Obviously, for my full review and official 0 to 60 scores, etc., you're going to have to wait until I can get my hands on this at home, run it through my usual paces, and of course on the usual surfaces that I test 0 to 60 and 60 to 0 on. But I can safely say that if you're looking for the fastest entry in this segment, 0 to 60 or quarter mile, that's not going to be the TLX. But if you're looking for one of the most fun, and I think one of the most unique, that is going to be the TLX Type S, because the super handling all-wheel drive system makes this feel very different than most of the competition, especially something like the Audi S4. The Audi S4 has a relatively similar amount of weight up front on the front axle, but it doesn't have the torque vectoring rear axle that we find in the TLX. So even though this is heavier than a lot of the European competition, when you start pushing it harder, the rear end will rotate out on you, and it's a very pleasing feeling. The TLX is just an awful lot of fun to drive at 9/10. Now, somewhat unfortunately, depending on how you look at this, if you do plan on taking your vehicle to 10/10ths, or that very limit of its absolute performance, then obviously the TLX is not going to be where some of the competition is. But it is going to be an awful lot less expensive. And that's because a base TLX is essentially also a fully loaded TLX. Aside from the carbon fiber bits that you can buy from the dealer, lighted door sills, that sort of thing there, the only factory option on this vehicle is the lightweight wheel package and the summer tire option that this model has on it. And that means that this is thousands and thousands of dollars less expensive than a comparably equipped German option. An Audi S4 may have a lower starting price than the TLX, but by the time you add all the options and features that this model comes standard with onto that Audi, it's definitely going to be more expensive than this. And yes, a BMW 3 Series, the 340i, will go significantly faster 0 to 60 than this model. It's down under 4 seconds. But again, comparably equipped, it's going to be more expensive, and it's not going to have a torque vectoring rear axle. And depending on exactly what you want to do with your vehicle, this may be more engaging. It also, I think, sounds a little bit better. And even though it's too early to have official reliability and long-term ownership cost numbers, it's safe to say this is likely going to be less expensive to keep around than any of those European options, especially if you plan on buying rather than leasing your next luxury performance vehicle. So you should definitely keep the Acura TLX Type S on your shopping list. But I would also say, if you want to spend a little bit more and you want to get that next level in performance, you should take a look at the BMW M340i. It really is an excellent performance machine. Just know that it could cost you at least $10,000 more if you want the same kind of feature content that we find in this model for that BMW. And the ultimate question there is it worth $10,000 more than this TLX Type S?